The command center shook again as another orbital platform died in silent fire above Calrith Prime. And Colonel Veshtara gripped his console with all four hands while watching the tactical display dissolve into chaos around his homeworld. The Devourers had come without warning, as they always did. But this time, they had come in numbers that defied belief. 300 harvester ships and twice that many fighter drones, all working with the single-minded purpose of consuming everything the Calrith Empire had built over 5,000 years of civilization, sir. The third defensive line has collapsed, his tactical officer reported, her voice steady despite the fierce scent rolling off her scales in waves that Veshtara could smell even across the command deck. He watched another icon blink red and die on his screen, representing 6,000 souls aboard the defense station Krathvan, and knew that his people were facing extinction unless something changed in the next few hours. The Calrith had ruled this sector of space for millennia. Their plasma lances and quantum shields, the envy of a dozen younger species who looked to them for protection and guidance. But the Devourers cared nothing for reputation or ancient glory. High Command had gathered an emergency session, their faces appearing on screens around the circular chamber, and Veshtara saw the same expression on every scaled face, the look of beings who had run out of options and were now considering the unthinkable. "We must contact the Federation," Admiral Kreshtar said. His crest flattened in shame. "The Federation cannot reach us in time," General Vothran countered, pulling up trajectory calculations that showed the nearest Federation fleet was 3 weeks away at maximum burn. "Then we evacuate what we can and fall back to the colony worlds," what else suggested. But everyone knew that meant abandoning 4 billion Calrith to the Devourers. Harvesting Machness Veshter had been quiet during the debate, his mind racing through every tactical option and finding them all wanting, when a memory surfaced from 6 months ago, a battered trading ship with mismatched hull plating and engines that belched actual chemical exhaust. Crewed by beings who called themselves humans, the captain had been small by Calrith standards, barely reaching Veshtara's chest, even when standing straight. But she had carried herself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance as she negotiated for docking privileges. Veshtara remembered most clearly was the conversation in the station bar afterward, when the human crew had relaxed and started sharing stories from their homeworld, tales of warriors who fought with primitive weapons, of wars that lasted years or decades or even centuries, of a species that seemed to view violence not as a regrettable necessity but as something almost recreational. "They're primitives," one of his officers had said dismissively after the humans departed, and Veshtara had agreed at the time, noting in his report that humanity had only achieved faster-than-light travel 200 years ago, and still relied on fusion drives and kinetic weapons. But now, watching his civilization burn, Veshtara wondered if perhaps the Calrith had been measuring the humans against the wrong standards. "What about the humans?" he said aloud, and the entire command center went silent. Admiral Kreshtar stared at him as if he had suggested surrendering immediately. The humans? That barely spacefaring species from the frontier colonies? What could they possibly offer us? Veshtara pulled up the files from that trading encounter, displaying the technical specifications the humans had provided for their warships, and highlighted a section that he had previously dismissed as clerical error because the numbers seemed too absurd to be real. "Their warships carry something they call," he said, zooming in on the data, "and according to these specifications, a single human cruiser carries enough firepower to sterilize a continent, chemical explosives, and fission reactions." General Vothran scoffed, his crest rising in what might have been amusement or disbelief. "We abandoned such crude technology 3,000 years ago, yes," Veshtara agreed, his claws tapping rapidly against his console as he pulled up more data. "But we abandoned it because we found more efficient methods. Not because we had ever used it on this scale." The tactical display showed another platform dying, and the Devourer fleet was now close enough that their harvester tendrils were reaching into the upper atmosphere, beginning the process that would strip Calrith Prime of every useful molecule within a week. "The humans have a colony called New Texas 8 light-years from here," Veshtara continued, his voice gaining strength as the desperate plan took shape in his mind. "Their quantum band transmitters are primitive but functional, and we could reach them within the hour and say, what exactly? Admiral Kreshtar demanded, his tail lashing in agitation. Please help us, young species that we have barely acknowledged. Please save us with your backwards technology. Vishtara met the Admiral's gaze steadily. We say exactly that, because pride is a luxury we can no longer afford. The debate raged for another 7 minutes while more Calrith died above and below, until finally the High Command voted and gave Veshtara authorization to make the call that would change everything. His communication officer established the quantum link to New Texas, and Veshtara composed his message carefully, knowing that he was quite possibly humiliating his entire species, but seeing no other choice, the response came back in less than 3 minutes. Far faster than he had expected, and the voice that crackled over the speakers was cheerful in a way that seemed completely inappropriate given the circumstances. New Texas Defense Coordination here, Colonel, and we read you loud and clear, the human said. Her accent strange, but understandable. Y'all got yourselves a bug problem that needs solving. Vishtara had prepared a formal request full of diplomatic language and proper protocols, but what came out of his mouth was simply, yes. Need help now. Well, shoot, why didn't you say so earlier? The human replied, and Veshtara could hear other voices in the background. People shouting and machinery powering up. We'll round up the boys and be there before you know it. How many ships can you send? Veshtara asked, trying to calculate how much time even a small human force might buy them. There was a pause, and then the human laughed. Honey, we're putting out the call to every armed vessel within jump range. So I'd say count on at least 15 or 20 to start with, and more coming once word gets around 20 ships. Admiral Kreshtar breathed, peering on Veshtara's screen with an expression somewhere between hope and despair. Against 300. Hold tight, Colonel, the human said, her voice suddenly serious and professional in a way that reminded Veshtara of career soldiers everywhere. Humans are real good at killing things that need killing, and from what you're describing, these devourers need killing real bad. The transmission ended, and Veshtara looked around his command center at officers who were staring at him with expressions ranging from horror to desperate hope. What have we done? Someone whispered. Veshtara returned his attention to the tactical display, watching the devourer fleet continue its methodical destruction of everything his people held dear. We have asked the humans for help, and now we wait to see if our pride has cost us less than our extinction would have. 3 days. The humans had said. And Veshtara began counting the hours while his world burned and wondered what exactly was coming to answer their desperate call. 3 days had crawled past like wounded prey beasts, and Calrith Prime was dying by degrees. The devourers had established harvesting positions over 6 continents, their tendrils drinking the oceans and stripping the forests, while the remaining Calrith's defense forces fought a losing battle against overwhelming numbers. Veshtar had not slept in 72 hours, sustained only by stimulants and the desperate hope that the humans would actually come. Because even his faith was wavering as he watched another evacuation ship get torn apart by devourer fighters. Then his sensor officer shouted something incomprehensible and pointed at the long-range display, where 17 new contacts had just appeared at the edge of the system. Their jump signatures crude and violent compared to the elegant quantum transitions of Calrith vessels. The humans. Veshtara breathed, and felt something uncurl in his chest that might have been hope or might have been Taratha. First thing he noticed was that the human ships were all different. No 2 vessels shared the same configuration, ranging from sleek military cruisers to bulky cargo haulers that had been festooned with weapon mounts and armor plating in what appeared to be recent and hasty modifications. Commander Sarah F. Chun's face appeared on his main screen. A small human woman with dark hair, pulled back severely, and eyes that held the kind of hardness Veshtara associated with soldiers who had seen too much death. Colonel Veshtara, good to finally meet you face to face, she said, her voice calm despite the chaos visible on her own bridge behind her. We've brought some friends and enough ordnance to make these bugs regret ever hearing about Calrith Prime Commander. I cannot express my gratitude, Veshtara began, but Chen cut him off with a raised hand. Save the thanks for after we've won, she said, then grinned in a way that reminded Veshtara of a predator showing its teeth. We brought our own music. Hope you don't mind, before Vestara could ask what that meant. A transmission began broadcasting across every frequency, loud, discordant sounds that his translator struggled to process. Something the humans called heavy metal, with screaming instruments and pounding rhythms that seemed designed to inspire aggression. Is that or those war drums? His tactical officer asked, her crest rising in confusion. I believe it is their battle music, Vestara replied. Watching the human fleet form up in what looked less like a military formation and more like a pack of hunters preparing to charge. And I think we are about to learn what humans consider proper combat doctrine. The Devourer fleet had noticed the new arrivals and was reforming to meet them, pulling back harvester ships and deploying fighter screens in the precise, coordinated manner that had crushed every defense that Calrith had mounted. The humans charged directly at them with their engines burning at what Vestara's sensors said was 115% of rated capacity, which should have been impossible and suicidal. And he realized with growing horror that the humans were not slowing down. They are going to ram the Devourer line, Admiral Kreshtar said from his command ship, his voice filled with disbelief. They are actually going to ram them, but at the last moment the human ships scattered in 17 different directions, their pilots executing maneuvers that would have killed any Calrith crew from the acceleration forces alone. And suddenly, the space around the Devourer fleet was filled with nuclear. Fire Vestara had read about nuclear weapons in historical archives. Primitive fission devices that released enormous amounts of energy in uncontrolled explosions. But he had never imagined seeing them used in space combat where their radiation and blast effects should have been negligible. The humans, apparently, had not bothered to inform the universe about what should and should not be possible. Because their nuclear missiles were shredding Devourer fighter screens and forcing their cruisers to pull back from the expanding radiation clouds. How are they achieving those yields in vacuum? His tactical officer demanded, her claws flying over her console as she tried to analyze the detonations-shaped charges with magnetic bottles. Chen's voice came over the command channel. Apparently monitoring their frequencies, we contain the initial blast long enough to focus it, then let it go all at once. Works real pretty, don't it? A Devourer cruiser died in a flash of light as something the humans called a gun run. Put 6 dozen railgun slugs through its central processing core, and Vestara watched in amazement as human pilots flew directly through point defense fire that should have vaporized their ship's target lock established. A human pilot's voice crackled over the intercept channels, calm, despite the fact that his ship was taking hits that were punching holes through its hull. Fox 3. Nuclear package away. The Devourer harvester ship tried to evade, but it was too large and too slow, and the nuclear warhead caught it amidships and split it open like overripe fruit, spilling its collection tanks into space in a cloud of frozen water and organic matter. Vestara realized he was watching humans fight the way predators fought, with no concern for their own safety and total focus on destroying the enemy, and it was the most terrifying and beautiful thing he had ever seen. A human destroyer took a plasma lance through its engine section and began tumbling, atmosphere venting from a dozen breaches, but its crew kept firing their remaining weapons even as their ship died around them. This is Destroyer Houston. We are Winchester and going critical, the captain's voice announced, using human military terminology that Vestara's translator struggled with. All ships clear our position. We are making one last run. The destroyer's reactor went into deliberate overload, and the captain aimed his dying ship at a Devourer cruiser, ramming it at full speed and taking both vessels out in a matter-antimatter annihilation that lit up every sensor on the Calrith command deck. Vestara wanted to honor the sacrifice, to acknowledge the courage of those who had just died for a species they barely knew. But there was no time because the battle was spreading across the entire orbital space. More human ships were arriving now, smaller craft that must have jumped in from nearby systems. And Vestara realized with growing amazement that these were civilian vessels, cargo haulers and passenger liners, and even what appeared to be a mining barge, all armed with whatever weapons their crews could mount. Commander Chen, those civilian ships should fall back, he transmitted urgently. They are not equipped for this kind of combat. Chen's laugh was sharp and without humor. Colonel, you don't understand humans very well yet. Those civilians volunteered for this, and they would shoot me if I tried to order them away." Converted cargo hauler proved her point by using its industrial cutting lasers to slice through a Devourer fighter screen, while a passenger liner launched what appeared to be mining explosives in a pattern that caught 3 enemy vessels in overlapping detonations. The Calrith Defense Forces, which had been holding a desperate perimeter around the planet, suddenly surged forward as hope replaced despair. And Veshtara found himself coordinating a combined assault that was pushing the Devourers back, for the first time in 3 days, all human ships. "This is Chen. Concentrate fire on the command carriers," the commander ordered, her tactical display highlighting the largest Devourer vessels. "Kill the brain and the body stops moving," the humans obliged with enthusiasm that bordered on mania, focusing their entire fleet on 3 massive carriers that coordinated the Devourer fighter swarms. And Veshtara watched as nuclear fire and railgun slugs and even chemical rockets hammered into the enemy command structure. 1 carrier died. Then another, and suddenly the Devourer fighters were moving without coordination. Their hive mind disrupted by the loss of their controlling intelligence, they are falling back. Admiral Kreshtar reported, his voice filled with wonder. "The Devourers are actually retreating from orbital space." Veshtara looked at the tactical display and saw it was true. The enemy fleet was pulling away from the planet, regrouping at the edge of weapons range, and he knew this was only a temporary respite, but for the first time in 3 days. His people were not dying by the thousands. "And that was enough, Commander Chen," he transmitted. "Your people have given us breathing room. But the Devourers will adapt and return in greater numbers." "Good," Chen replied. And her smile was the kind that made Veshtara remember why humans had climbed to the top of their own world's food chain. "We haven't had a proper fight in almost 6 months. And the boys were getting bored. Veshtara looked around his command deck at officers who were staring at the human fleet with expressions of awe and terror, and realized that they had not just called for help from a primitive species, they had unleashed something that the galaxy was not prepared for. And Veshtara prayed that the Devourers would learn to fear it before his own people did. The Devourers had learned from their first encounter with humanity, and when they returned 6 hours later, they came with adapted tactics, tighter formations, overlapping fields of fire, and targeting patterns specifically designed to counter the humans. Aggressive close-ranged fighting style. 2 human ships died in the first exchange. A frigate called the Shanghai and a armed merchant vessel named Lucky Star. And Veshtara listened to their final transmissions with growing horror. Shanghai's captain sang something his translator called a sea shanty as his ship broke apart, while Lucky Star's crew shouted defiance in 3 different human languages before their reactor breached. "They are singing as they die," Veshtara's tactical officer whispered. Her scales pale with shock. "They are warriors," he replied quietly, understanding finally what that meant to humans. "And warriors of their kind do not go quietly into death, Commander." Chen's face on his screen was tight with grief, but her voice remained steady. "Colonel, we need to put boots on the ground. The Devourers have established harvesting stations on your southern continent, and orbital bombardment risks civilian casualties." Veshtara pulled up the tactical map and saw that she was correct. 3 massive Devourer processing facilities had dug into the continent of Kreshner, where 40 million Calrith were trapped behind enemy lines. "Commander, I hesitate to ask more of your people," he said carefully, watching human ships continue to trade fire with Devourer cruisers in a battle that was slowly grinding both fleets down. "But if you can provide ground support," Colonel Chen interrupted, and her expression was serious in a way he had not seen before. "You really don't want us down there? We're not gentle, and we don't fight the way civilized species fight. My people are being harvested," Veshtara said flatly, pulling up surveillance footage of Devourer machines processing living Calrith into component molecules. "I will accept any help, gentle or otherwise." Chen was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "Understood. We are deploying 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, and whatever militia volunteers want to join them. But Colonel, keep your people clear of our operational zones." You will not like what you see. The first human dropships hit atmosphere 30 minutes later, their hulls glowing cherry red from friction as they punched through Devourer air defense systems that would have shredded any Calrith landing craft. Terra had assigned observation teams to shadow the human ground forces, and when the initial reports came back, he thought there must be translation errors, because surely no sapient species would arm their soldiers with such primitive and brutal weapons, sir. The humans are carrying chemical propellant firearms, incendiary devices, and the observer hesitated. And melee weapons, sir? They have attached blades to their rifles' blades? Admiral Kreshtar demanded from his command ship. They are fighting with swords? Not swords, sir, the observer corrected, his voice shaking. Chainsaws. They have attached chainsaws to their rifles. Veshtara pulled up the live feed from his observation. Teeman immediately understood Chun's warning about not being gentle. The humans moved through the Devourer positions like a natural disaster made flesh. Their body armor was covered in weapons and ammunition. They communicated through shouts and hand signals, even though they had radios. And they advanced into enemy fire with a determination that bordered on madness. Devourer bioform. A six-legged harvesting machine the size of a Calrith tank charged a human squad, and the Marines simply stood their ground and fired, their chemical rifles making a sound like continuous thunder when the bioform fell. One Marine ran forward and attacked its processor core with his chainsaw bayonet, cutting through armored carapace with a whining scream of tortured metal. They are insane. Someone breathed on the command channel. They are actually insane, but insane or not, the humans were winning. They pushed into the Devourer positions with an aggression that the hive mind clearly had no response for. Because the Devourers had evolved to fight species that valued their own lives, the Marines did not seem to value their lives, or rather they valued victory more. And they paid for every meter of ground in blood and fury. Human platoon held an evacuation point where 10,000 disease Calrith civilians were being loaded onto transports. And when the Devourers threw a full harvester swarm at them, the Marines did not fall back. Veshtara watched for 6 hours as that platoon fought. They sang. They shouted insults at the enemy in their own language. They called for ammunition and reinforcements and medical evacuation. But they never once suggested retreat when Calrith reinforcements finally arrived. They found the humans still holding their position, standing among mountains of destroyed Devourer bioforms, their armor scorched, indented, and covered in gore. Anyone got water? One Marine asked casually, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. And are there more bugs to kill? Veshtara realized that the humans were not just helping his people, they were enjoying this. And that realization was more disturbing than anything else he had witnessed. Commander Chen, he transmitted, watching human forces continue to push deeper into Devourer-held territory. Your Marines are asking if there are more enemies to fight, Chen laughed. A sound without much humor. Yeah, that sounds about right. We are a species that climbed to the top of a death world food chain by being meaner and more stubborn than anything. That wanted to eat us. The ground campaign continued for 3 more days. And Veshtara learned things about human warfare that would give him nightmares for years. He learned that humans had words for over 100 different types of combat. Urban warfare, jungle, fighting, mountain operations, Arctic survival, desert tactics, and dozens more specific methods of killing. He learned that human Marines considered a 70-kilogram load of weapons and equipment to be light and would march for days under that weight without complaint. He learned that humans had entire songs dedicated to violence, death, and defiance, and they sang them while charging into enemy fire. Most disturbing of all, he learned that the humans at Calrith Prime were not even their best soldiers. Just volunteers and militia who had happened to be close enough to respond quickly. Colonel, you should know that First Fleet is burning toward your position from Earth, Chen mentioned during one tactical briefing. They will arrive in 2 weeks with 40,000 Marines and enough naval support to crack a moon. How many humans are there? Veshtara asked, suddenly needing to know the answer on Earth. About 12 billion, Chen replied, then smiled at his expression. And every single one of us learns to fight before we learn to read. because that is what you do when you evolve on a planet that is actively trying to kill you. A Devourer counterattack hit the human lines that night, and Veshtara listened to the intercepted communications with growing amazement. Contact front. Estimate 200 bioforms. Heavy support needed actually. Cancel that. We got this second squad flank left and hit them with the flamers. Someone tell Martinez to stop laughing like a maniac. It is creeping out. The aliens. Grenade out. Grenade out. Fire in the hole. The sounds of battle were continuous. Explosions. Gunfire. Shouting. And underneath it all, humans singing or laughing or cursing in a dozen different languages. By morning, the counterattack had been crushed, and the Marines had pushed forward another 5 kilometers, clearing 3 more Devourer harvesting facilities and liberating another 6 million Calrith civilians. Vesha met with a human squad leader, a massive scarred man named Sergeant Williams, who stood half a head shorter than him but carried himself like he could fight the entire Devourer fleet. Single-handed. Sergeant, how many battles have you fought? Veshtara asked, trying to understand these creatures who had saved his world. Williams thought for a moment, counting on his fingers. Personally? Maybe 40 or 50 deployments, but that is low for my age. One spent a few years training recruits instead of fighting 40 or 50 battles, Veshtara repeated, his mind struggling with the number. And you are considered inexperienced? Oh no, sir. I am experienced, Williams corrected. But there are soldiers who have been fighting for 20 or 30 years. They are the ones you really don't want to mess with. The sergeant paused, then added, humans have been fighting each other for our entire history, Colonel. And now that we have found other species to fight for instead of against, well, we are just doing what we do best. Veshtara looked at the Marines around him, exhausted and battered, but still ready to fight, and understood finally what his people had unleashed upon the Devourers. They had not asked for help from a primitive species. They had asked the most dangerous predators in the galaxy to protect them, and the Devourers were learning too late what that meant. 2 weeks into the battle for Calrith Prime, something happened that had never occurred in the 5,000-year history of Devourer expansion. The hive mind attempted to communicative. Terra was coordinating a combined assault on the last major Devourer stronghold when every communication system in the command center suddenly blazed with an incoming transmission on frequencies that should not have been accessible to the enemy Calrith forms. We offer cessation of harvesting operations. The Devourer hive mind spoke through 1,000 synthesized voices. Withdraw the human forms, and we will depart this system. The command deck went absolutely silent. And Veshtara looked at Admiral Kreshtar's image on his screen with an expression that he knew mirrored the shock on every Calrith face. They have never negotiated before. The Admiral whispered, in 500 encounters, across 200 worlds, the Devourers have never once offered terms. Commander Chen's face appeared on another screen, and she was grinning like a human who had just won a significant wager. Colonel, are you hearing this? The bugs want to make a deal, Commander. This is unprecedented, Veshtara replied, his mind racing through the implications. If they are willing to negotiate hard pass, Chen interrupted, her expression shifting from amusement to something cold and deadly. We came here to finish a job. Not to watch these things fly away so they can harvest someone else's world next month. The Devourer transmission came again, more insistent. Human forms have inflicted unacceptable resource expenditure. We calculate that continued operations will result in net negative returns. Withdrawal of human forms will result in our immediate departure. Veshtara realized that the Devourers were not negotiating out of mercy or morality. They were attempting to cut their losses because humans had made the harvesting of Calrith Prime too expensive to continue. They are afraid, he said aloud, the words feeling strange in his mouth. The Devourers are actually afraid. Damn right they are, Chen agreed, then opened a channel to the Devourer hive mind. This is Commander Sarah Chen of the Human Expeditionary Force. And here is our counteroffer. You leave this system right now, and we will only chase you for 100 light years. Or you stay, and we demonstrate exactly why Earth spawned us as its apex predators. There was a long pause. Then the Devourer hive mind responded, human forms are irrational, Economic analysis suggests negotiated settlement is optimal outcome for all parties. Economic analysis did not account for the fact that humans hold grudges, Chen replied, her voice cheerful in a way that made Veshtara's scales crawl. You tried to eat our friends, and now we are going to make an example of you. The human fleet had grown to 47 ships as reinforcements arrived from across human space, military vessels, armed merchants, and even a colony transport that had been hastily refitted with missile tubes and railgun mounts. Veshtara watched the tactical display as Chen coordinated with her fellow captains, planning an assault on the Devourer hive ship, a planetoid-sized vessel that had positioned itself at the edge of the system and was coordinating the entire enemy. Fleet Colonel, we are going after their queen, Chen explained, highlighting the massive ship on her tactical display. Kill that, and the whole swarm loses cohesion, Commander. That vessel is 15 kilometers in diameter and protected by 200 warships, Veshtara protested, running quick calculations that showed any assault would be suicidal. We cannot possibly watch us, Chen interrupted, and began issuing orders that made Veshtara question whether humans understood basic mathematics. The combined human and Kalrith fleet moved into position over the next 6 hours, with the Kalrith forces providing long-range fire support while the humans organized what they called a knife fight approach all ships. This is Chen. We are going straight down their throats, the commander broadcast. Kalrith forces will suppress their point defense. We punch through and deliver the package. Anyone who wants out can leave now, and no one will think less of you. Not a single human ship broke formation. And Veshtara heard several captains laugh at the suggestion they might retreat. The assault began with a Kalrith bombardment that lit up the Devourer defensive perimeter, plasma lances and quantum torpedoes hammering into their screening ships and forcing them to maneuver. Then, the humans charged through the gap with every engine burning at maximum, their ships taking horrific damage as they pushed into point-blank range of the hive ship. Veshtara watched in horror as human vessels died. The cruiser Moscow took a harvester beam directly through its bridge. The destroyer Sol lost its entire starboard side to a proximity mine. The armed merchant Lucky Lucy literally came apart under the strain of her own engines, but the survivors kept coming. And suddenly, they were inside the devoured defensive sphere, moving too fast and too close for the enemy's heavy weapons to track package delivery in 30 seconds. A calm voice announced over the tactical channel, and Veshtara realized it was coming from a battered freighter called the Montana Pride. He pulled up the ship's specifications and felt his blood turn cold. Montana Pride was a fusion drive cargo hauler that had been loaded with 73 antimatter warheads and was now burning directly toward the hive ship's equatorial processing complex. Montana Pride, you need to launch those weapons and get clear, Veshtara transmitted urgently. You cannot possibly survive a run that close, Colonel. Someone has to guide them in, the freighter's captain replied, her voice cheerful despite the fact that she was piloting her ship to certain death. And besides, I always wanted to see if we could crack a moon. Looks like today I get to find out, Captain. Please, Veshtara began, but Chen cut him off. Let her go. Colonel, the commander said quietly. This is what we do. Montana Pride punched through the last defensive line, trailing fire and atmosphere, her hull rupturing in a dozen places but her engines still burning, and slammed directly into the hive ship's central core. The detonation was visible from Kalrith Prime's surface, a new star that burned for 17 seconds before fading. And when Veshtara's sensors cleared, he saw that the hive ship was breaking apart, its massive hull fractured by forces that had briefly replicated the interior of a sun hive ship is critical. She is going down, someone shouted over the tactical net. All ships clear the debris field. But before the celebration could begin, a transmission came from the wreckage of Montana Pride. Montana Pride to fleet. We have ejected in the pod. Repeat, we have ejected. Please send recovery craft and someone bring beer. Veshtara stared at his screen in disbelief as rescue transponders lit up, showing that Montana Pride's crew had survived by ejecting in an armored escape pod at the last possible moment they survived. Admiral Kreshtar breathed. They flew into a suicide run and survived. Humans are very hard to kill, Sir Veshtara replied, watching the rescue operations begin. I believe that is the point. The destruction of the hive ship sent shockwaves through the Devourer fleet. Without central coordination, their formations fell apart. Ships began fleeing in random directions. The hive mind's communications dissolved into static human, and Calrith forces pursued them without mercy, running down fleeing ships and destroying them one by one. And for the first time in recorded history, a Devourer harvesting fleet was completely annihilated. Colonel Veshtara. This is Montana Pride's captain. Transmission came through as the recovered crew was brought aboard a Calrith medical frigate. Sorry we did not get to see the boom up close. Sensors cut out right before the best part. Veshtara did not know whether to laugh or cry. So he did neither and simply replied, "Captain, you have saved my entire species. You may complain about missing explosions as much as you like. The last Devourer ship died 3 hours later. Caught trying to jump to FTL by a human destroyer that had chased it halfway across the system, all enemy contacts eliminated," Chen reported. And her voice was tired but satisfied. Calrith Prime is secure. Veshtara looked around his command center at officers who were cheering and crying and embracing each other, and knew that his people owed their existence to a species they had once dismissed as primitive. Commander Chen, he transmitted, "How can we possibly thank you?" "By the first round when we get planet-side," Chen replied. "And maybe tell your government that humans make pretty good friends to have around." Veshtara looked at the tactical display showing the debris field where the Devourer fleet had died, and thought that pretty good friends might be the understatement of the millennium. But he also knew that he never wanted to see what humans were like as enemies, because that was a nightmare he hoped the galaxy would never have to face. 1 month after the last Devourer ship died screaming into the void, Veshtara stood on a reviewing platform, overlooking the Plaza of Heroes in Calrith Prime's capital city, and tried to find words that could express what his people owed to humanity. The plaza was filled with thousands of Calrith civilians, all of them alive, because humans had decided that protecting strangers was worth dying for. And Veshtara saw human marines scattered throughout the crowd. Looking uncomfortable with the attention, Commander Chen stood beside him on the platform, her dress uniform immaculate, but her expression suggesting she would rather be anywhere else. "Commander, I have written 17 different speeches, and none of them feel adequate," Veshtara admitted quietly. Watching the crowd settle into expectant silence. "Just speak from the heart," Colonel Chen replied. "Humans do not need fancy words. We know what we did and why we did it." Veshtara stepped forward and began, 1 month ago. My people faced extinction, and in our desperation, we called upon a species we barely knew and frankly did not respect." He heard some uncomfortable shifting in the crowd, but continued. "We thought humans were primitive because they still used chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. We thought they were backwards because they had only achieved faster than light travel. 2 centuries ago, we were wrong about everything." The crowd was completely silent now. Hanging on every word, the humans came when we called, they fought when we needed them, and they died protecting people they had never met, Veshtara said, his voice growing stronger. "They did this not because they owed us anything, not because we could pay them, but because protecting the innocent is what humans do." He turned to face the human contingent, Commander Chen, Sergeant Williams, Captain Martinez, and all the human warriors who answered our call. "The Calrith people owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Chen stepped forward, and Veshtara expected some formal response about duty and honor. But instead, she smiled and said, "Colonel, we are persistence hunters. We chase our prey until it drops dead from exhaustion. And we protect our friends the same way." She paused. Looking out over the crowd, "The Devourers made a mistake when they attacked you, because now you are under human protection, and we have made it very clear to the galaxy what happens to anyone who messes with our friends." The crowd erupted in cheers that went on for several minutes, and Veshtara saw human marines looking embarrassed and pleased in equal measure. Later that evening, the Calrith High Council met in emergency session to vote on a formal alliance with humanity, and the vote was unanimous. This treaty grants humanity access to our space, our technology, and our resources, Admiral Kreshtar announced. Reading the formal declaration, and in exchange, we gain the friendship and protection of Earth and her colonies. Some of our people will say we are giving away too much, General Vothran noted. his crest rising in concern. Some of our people would be devour fertilizer without human intervention. Veshtara replied bluntly, I think friendship with humanity is worth any price. The treaty was signed the next day in a ceremony that was broadcast across Calrith space, and Commander Chen accepted it with typical human informality. Just call if you need something blown up. That is what we are good at, but it was what happened 3 months later that truly demonstrated the value of human friendship. A species called the Vothran, distant cousins of the Calrith, sent a desperate message requesting military assistance. Their colony worlds being raided by a pirate fleet that had grown bold enough to attack civilian targets. The Calrith High Council debated sending their own forces, still recovering from the Devourer War. When Veshtara stood and made a suggestion that would have been unthinkable 4 months earlier, let me make a call first, he said. An open to quantum channel to New Texas? The response came back in less than an hour. We have got 12 ships in the area that are bored and looking for action. When do you need them? Veshtara coordinated with the Vothran military command and arranged for the human ships to rendezvous with their defense fleet in the contested system. What happened next became legend throughout the sector. The pirate fleet, numbering 40 vessels and commanded by a Kreth warlord named Shertok, who had terrorized the region for 5 years, was preparing to raid another colony when 12 human ships dropped out of FTL, broadcasting heavy metal music at maximum volume. Mishurotic, who had fought against Calrith Federation and independent forces without ever being defeated, took one look at the human transponder codes and immediately transmitted unconditional surrender. We will leave this system. We will never return. We will disband our fleet, the pirate warlord said, his voice shaking with what might have been terror. Just please do not send the humans after us. When asked how he knew about human military capabilities, Shertok explained that word had spread through every pirate haven and criminal network in the sector. Humanity had destroyed an entire devourer harvesting fleet. Something no other species had ever accomplished. Fighting humans is suicide, he said simply. Everyone knows this now. The human ships did not fire a single shot. They simply escorted the pirates out of Vothran space and made sure they kept running. Commander Chen transmitted a message to Veshtara afterward. Easiest deployment we ever had. We showed up, and the bad guys ran away. Maybe we should just broadcast our transponder codes before every fight, but Veshtara understood the real message. Humanity had become the galaxy's deterrent, the species that made predators think twice before attacking. Anyone under human protection 6 months after the Battle of Calrith Prime, as it was now known, Veshtara was promoted to Supreme Commander of Calrith's defense forces, and given the task of reorganizing their entire military structure, he studied human tactical doctrines, interviewed human officers, slowly began implementing changes that would have horrified his predecessor Skulth. Soldiers began training in close-quarters combat. Their ships started carrying nuclear weapons as backup systems, and most controversially, he instituted a new military motto borrowed from the human Marines: first to fight. Not everyone approved of these changes. We are becoming too much like them, one conservative council member complained. We are abandoning our own culture to copy human savagery. Veshtara looked at the counselor with eyes that had seen his entire species nearly die. Our culture almost got us exterminated. Human savagery saved 4 billion lives. I know which one I prefer. A year after the battle, Veshtara stood once again on the command deck of his flagship. But this time, he was watching a joint training exercise between Calrith and human forces. The improvements were remarkable. Calrith soldiers who had learned from human Marines now moved with confidence and aggression, their tactics blending Calrith precision with human creativity. Colonel Veshtara, you have created a pretty decent fighting force, Sergeant Williams said. The human having agreed to stay on as a training advisor? They might actually survive a real fight now. High praise from a human, Veshtara replied dryly. I assume that means they would last at least 5 minutes. Williams laughed. At least 10, and that is better than most species managed that evening. Veshtara sat in his quarters writing his final report on the Devourer War, the document that would become required reading for every military officer in Calrith space. His conclusion read, the humans are terrifying in their capacity for violence, irrational in their willingness to sacrifice themselves, and the best friends we could ever ask for, I pray that we never become their enemy. Because I have seen what humans do to their enemies. And it is the stuff of nightmares, but I have also seen what they do for their friends. And it gives me hope that we might actually survive in this dangerous galaxy." He paused. Then added one final line. "The humans have a saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. I now understand that humanity is the big stick. And the galaxy is learning to speak very softly indeed." 2 years after the Battle of Calrith Prime, another species sent out a distress call. The Shivari were being invaded by a militant empire that sought to enslave their population. The Galactic Federation debated sending peacekeepers. The various councils argued about jurisdiction and proper procedures, and diplomats filed strongly worded protests. Vester listened to all of this for exactly 30 minutes before he stood up in the council chamber and made his own announcement. The Calrith defense forces are responding to the Shivari call for aid, he said formally, and we are bringing friends. He opened a channel to New Texas, and the response was immediate. "How many ships do you need, Colonel?" "As many as you can send," Vestara replied. "We have innocent people to protect outstanding." "We will rally the fleet and meet you there," the human coordinator said, then added, "Thanks for calling us, Colonel." We were getting bored again as Vestara's ship prepared to jump to FTL. He looked at the tactical display showing 30 Calrith vessels moving into formation alongside 40 human ships, and smiled. The slavers who had invaded Shivari space were about to learn the most imp